So getting started, anytime that you've done something, kind of drifted away from it, and then start to redo it, it feels a little weird. It doesn't feel quite as fresh. And with any methodology, I think with any methodology, or actually any process, what we're learning in our lean training, our Kaizen training, is that any process is better than no process. Any shared process, even a broken process that's shared, is better than no process. And so, whether we're a crack team, or whether we're a broken team, or whether we're a scattered group of individuals, there will be benefit for all of us to have the same vocabulary and the same kind of exposure for things. And hopefully this will get us moving. Just like NFL football players don't just play football games, even though they're professionals and they're playing their entire lives. They practice skills and drills. Anything worth doing is worth practicing the little components and repeating. So if this is review, just think of it as that. Think of yourself as a professional who's practicing and doing little drills to make sure they have the fundamentals down. So getting started, planning. So this is, just so you guys know what I'm going to cover, this is part of the estimating summit, the estimating seminar that we talked about having in our strategic plan. I think you, when we presented to the strategic planning group last time, you said, didn't do this one on the group's behalf. So this is part of picking that up. I thought it would just be like a one big long session. I thought that might be the best format, but it looks like it might turn into like 4 of these mini sessions rather than one big long session. Hopefully there will be continuity, and these things will be recorded so you can look back at them if need be, if this isn't enough. The books that I've been using to do this, because it's so focused on the upfront piece of our practices, have been the Kent Beck, Martin Fowler book, Planning Extreme Programming, and the Mike Kahn Succeeding with Agile books. So these are 2 books that are in our library, and they're on the recommended reading list. So if you want to grab them, that's fine. There's online versions of them as well. I don't know. I think I have an audio version of Extreme Programming. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have an audio version of this, and I think I have an ebook version of it as well. And I think it might even be on our iPad. I've been trying to load every book that we get ebook versions of onto the iPad as well, as I'm having these books. So if you want, many different sources to get access to these books, if you want to take a look in more depth. I'm going to give the high-level overview, and hopefully that'll be good enough to get us all on the same page. So Agile or Extreme Programming, they're kind of interchangeable words. They're about getting light. And if you think of a more traditional set of project management or process management for software development, they're heavyweight methodologies. And even if you go to our lean classes, I think some of our lean classes miss the spirit of what lean is supposed to be about. They'll talk about creating a standard of work, creating a new process to catch the error condition, to catch the thing that's being missed, the handoff or the communication, and then they produce this standard of work. So another document to fill out, another set of processes or checklists that you have to follow. And so Agile is the opposite of that. And again, I don't actually think that that's totally a lean principle. I think that's more of a traditionalist method that we as a culture have adopted into our lean practices here at Carlson. But the question that it's always asking is, what process do we need to add, or what material do we need to add to this situation so that this new situation doesn't, or the issue that arose doesn't happen again? And I think that what lean says is that's never the answer. Creating more bureaucracy, more paperwork, more things you have to do is the wrong answer, and it's actually the wrong question to ask. Even what thing can we put in place to capture this error condition? So I think Agile goes the exact opposite way and says we're in a quest for speed and mobility, and so what do we need to take out of our process to create a fast, smooth-flowing, productive development cycle. And that notion of a fast-flowing flow is, I think, what's at the heart of Lean, not more processes, more paperwork, more standard of work documents that have to be filled out that are meaningless. Yes, they may catch error conditions. Yes, they may do all that. They just do nothing to value. They just create bureaucracy. So flow is what I think all these practices are about, is creating as fast a flow as you possibly can through the software development lifecycle. So, let's see. Practice is not Agile and Lean is not about predicting the future. This is a negative statement, so I kind of don't like it in here. I kind of like to say what Lean is, but one of the easiest way, fastest way to explain what Lean is to say it's not about predicting the future. Most PMI, RUP, these other kind of frameworks, are project management frameworks, are all about control, or the illusion of control, and ultimately, I think what the people who actually created some of these things, like CMMI and RUP and PMI, have found is that, in fact, they don't actually catch and control and help you plan and organize. What they actually do is they create a big framework and architecture that gets in the way of everything that's happening. And you have to have special people who are assigned to those projects who do nothing but keep those things updated and try and communicate between teams and everything else. And that ends up being a process all on its own. I think Joel and Guy were here, and maybe Chan was here when. Wait, did everybody in IT? Maybe everyone was here except for JJ and Andrew when IBM came here and taught us the traditional PMI method of project management. Did you take it? You didn't take it? You took it, right? Yeah. Joel, you remember taking it?
Yeah.
Okay, Guy, were you here? You weren't here? Okay, sorry. Memory. I don't know how far back it was. Anyways, they came in and they taught us the traditional envisioning and planning and executing and controlling, and the whole typical project management style. What I think a lot of people think Agile is just crazy loosey-goosey stuff, and I would argue that it's not. I would argue that what it is it takes everything that's in PMI, which says you have to do all of this stuff, and then, oh, by the way, it's going to take so long that you have to have this big change management process that overrides over the whole top of all of these phases, because things are going to change. You have to get sign-off, you get scope redos. You're going to get new cost estimates because of it. You're going to get everything's going to have to move out, and so you get PERT charts and Gantt charts and all these other kind of crazy things being invented to track all this stuff. And change management becomes the biggest part of those PMI type, those traditional management type situations. Well, Lean says, take all that stuff and squish it down into a 2-week process or a 3-week process, or some people will even go as far as a month-long process. And once you do that, once you go down to a 2-week process, you squish everything so tight that you basically say, there is no room for change. We know that this next thing that we're going to do is the most important next thing to do, and so there's not going to be a change in the next 2 weeks. After that 2 weeks, we can reevaluate and we can change everything. But during that 2 weeks, we're not going to change it. So you take the normal PMI process and you squish all of it down into a 2-week time frame. So what this does, by pushing these down into these 2-week time frames, is rather than have one big analysis phase up front where you analyze all the requirements and you try and find all the requirements, which is ultimately is a failure. And once you start developing on those requirements, you got the requirements so long ago, you forget the nature of them, the true desire of the customer, and all these other kind of things. So what squeezing these down into these little mini projects and running mini project after mini project, so it becomes a series of 12 mini projects, what happens then is, because you're expected to deliver at the end of each one of those projects, you spread out the pressure that normally piles up at the very end of a big project. Normally, in a big project, you don't have to show the customer a whole lot. You just kind of go along. 90% of every story is done, leaving 10%, the hardest 10% of every story unfinished, every requirement unfinished. Nothing's integrated, nothing's user tested, and then at the very end, you're demoing and you're doing all this stuff that ends up just destroying your project.
So I think what you're saying is that every 2 weeks there's a replan, and I think that might be what we're missing.
And the delivery. The most important thing is the delivery. And that's what, in the pressure of delivering at the end of that 2 weeks is what something you want spread out across the entire project rather than just at the very end of a big, large project.
Well, I think we talked even less about planning and we did about delivering, and planning I think is important.
Well, that's what these 4 sessions will be all about. Is all about planning. So, yeah, I totally agree.
So, but I mean, I think one thing that I've also missed is the emphasis on the iteration planning is not just moving existing features into the next iteration. It's also a recheck
Yes.
of what
Yeah.
the functionality is, and if it's,
Yeah.
I mean, just a full recheck.
Yeah.
If that's what I'm hearing you say.
Sure. It is. Yeah. Usually what I would say is iteration planning. Okay, so there's the iteration, and then there's iteration planning that has to happen before it, right? And then there's some iteration review. We tend to stuff iteration review and iteration planning in the same meeting,
Yeah.
and then talk about the iteration we're about to do, right? So that's kind of how we do it. So the first one, you're just planning. The next one you're actually reviewing, and then reviewing what happened, and then planning new things. So that's kind of how we tend to do it. We don't have to do it that way. We could do it any way we want. But what happens, what we're missing, I think, at a fundamental level is release planning and having releases. Releases being, what are we going to deploy? Full functional, what are we expecting that will deploy during the release?
Right.
And then the release planning, the iteration planning is kind of pulling things off the backlog. But release planning gives you that big, high level, what are we trying to do and what are we trying to achieve and what do we think we're going to be able to achieve in the time? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
So if you have 3 iterations or 2 iterations in a release, then every week or every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, depending upon how long your iterations are, you're going back and looking at the big scope and saying, what's the next most important thing for us to do? What changed?
And what you said there, you're saying going back and looking at the big scope, which assumes that even though you don't have all the details, you still have an overall view of what you're trying to accomplish and what might have to come first and second and third.
Yeah.
You don't have all the details, but you do have an overview of what you need, which I think sometimes we don't do that as well either. We look at it and we know we're going to develop in chunks, and so we only look at it in chunks. And the piece from traditional programming that I would like to see us add in more is that at least a gross overview.
The gross overview is really important, and that's kind of the initial project piece, and then after the initial project piece, each release plan, there's got to be a release plan where you kind of spec out the whole scope of what you think you're going to do, again at a very gross, very coarse level of detail, right? So, anyways, the question right away comes, what is an iteration? And I would argue that my definition of an iteration is a set piece of time. But within that iteration, what happens is customers, and this is part of planning, customers pick the most valuable features to them, and we write stories for those features. The developer then turns around and tasks those things out and adds those features, and the team has to create automated tests to prove that the features are functioning and working as they're described by the customer. And then over time, the developers need to evolve the design of the software to meet new features. And the automated tests then reinforce the fact that does that feature that you just created yesterday continue to work even though you've evolved the design to adjust to a new feature. So in a nutshell, I think these are the 4 critical pieces of what an iteration is. So things that have to happen, that the team has to be careful about, the team has to ensure takes place, that the team is choosing the best features. A team does, in my opinion, the definition of team includes, I'm not saying the developers, I'm saying the team, including the customer, picks the best features. So the customer tells us what's of value, and then together as a team we make decisions about what go into the product. The team needs to react positively to setbacks. Every project has setbacks, and it's important to be upbeat and positive and move forward. I think in Connie, I think we have an awesome example of like a can-do. I think she so rarely focuses on the negative. She's always looking for moving forward, and I think the more we can use her example, the better. Team must not overcommit, so can't be saying things are going to be done when they're not going to be done. Team can't undercommit. Now, those are two big statements. So one is the overcommit, then people can't rely on you and they can't plan on you. And the next piece is with undercommit, you're not delivering enough value into the organization, into the project, and the product to be useful to the company. So between those two, we'll eventually talk about estimates and velocity, undercommitting and overcommitting. And velocity tries to capture any overcommitting you're doing. Velocity tries to capture any undercommitting you're doing and help you, kind of weed that out, kind of slough off where you're making mistakes. Again, I think velocity is so important, but we'll get to that in another session. And then, anyways, the team must know where they are. The team has to keep track of where they are. Again, we're at the very beginning of talking about planning and estimating these things. So these are kind of high-level concepts, but this is important, and this isn't just jargon. These words try to convey meaning. So Agile or XP is supposed to be the simplest planning ideas that could possibly work. So doing any more than that would technically be waste. And so in a lean sense, lean, you're always looking for waste. They don't say be more productive. Lean says chop out the waste. Lean says if you look at the total amount of work being done on any given thing, the amount of work that you do is minimal. And if you try to be more productive, you're trying to shrink those little teeny pieces of effort that you're putting in. But actually, most of what we do is waste. And if you try and focus on getting rid of the waste, without working any harder, you can actually deliver more or deliver faster. So I think this statement, the simplest planning idea that could possibly work, is at the heart of Agile, and I think it's also at the heart of Lean. A lot of people instead of using that wording, use the wording just good enough. The software has to be just good enough to meet the customer's needs. Our project planning methodology, our practices need to be just good enough to meet the value, to deliver the value that the customer expects. So, but it's hard. It's not about predicting the future. It's not about control. I think I will make at some point an argument about how a lot of people think that they are, by project managing, that they're controlling. And I would argue that at best, traditional project management is nothing more than a collaboration and a communication vehicle. They are not controlling. And the people who made Agile and XP, they are the people who originally created. They worked at IBM and Unisys and Sperry and all these places, and they created all these other big, chunky project management methodologies. CMMI is made by these same people. RUP, made by these same people, and they have all abandoned it and said it doesn't work, and they've all switched over. So, where do you find it? CMMI mostly.
I don't know where. I just hear about it.
You find it mostly in strong engineering discipline areas, and you find it in foreign countries that have not realized that it doesn't work yet.
Yeah, I know too.
Mostly India. If you go look up people, you'll find, we're CMMI 3, we're CMMI level 3. We can build a team for you that's CMMI level 4, and it's pretty much, it's like ISO standards. You know, it's something that they put in place so that they can say we have a capability and maturity level of this in our processing. A lot of people, when they look at XP and Agile, what they say is it's fixed. It's fixed in CMMI level 3. So if you read through the levels of CMMI, it like says it's the fastest way to get to CMMI level 3. It won't go any further. It won't, unless you abandon it, it won't let go any further, down, but it won't go any further forward as well. Joe, did you have something?
It's like Agile is supposed to be the simplest planning ideas that help you do it. Does that include design ideas? Planning ideas, they're not design ideas. So that was more like the simplest design ideas.
So there are definitely different aspects. There's like extreme programming as a practice, as a programmatic, practical approach to how do you build software. And then there's a whole bunch of things that are happening in there. We're not even going to go there. Paired programming, test-driven design, which is a design activity like you're talking about. Yep, that's a whole realm that comes after planning, and I'm going to stay away from that for right now.
I just wanted to mention, sometimes Agile programs will, and we did this in David Hudson's here, it doesn't always be great design, but sometimes when we were designing actual writing software, we would think the simplest possible approach to doing this software, like a possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I did those exercises too, where when we'd do the first thing and we'd start with no database, we'd start with a file because we don't need a database yet, and only after like 3 or 4 revs, which could happen in 2 hours, we would end up with, okay, now we need a database, and so we'd actually go out and we'd create the table with the one row that we're working on right now, or one column, not all the columns that we actually know we're going to need. I would say that is impractical. My experience has been that's impractical. I think Scott Ambler has done a pretty good job of doing agile modeling and basically saying, and if you, I'm gonna skip. No, I won't. I'll get to it later. I'll talk about it later. I'll bring it back up later. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. And the question that is always in our mind is, are we working on the most important thing left to do? So then, I think this slide deck will kind of get to what you're talking about. So that's why I'm putting you off right now. So the next section is why plan. Okay, before we get started on anything, I would say anything literally in life, well, maybe not in life, but most things. We want to know that what we're doing is important and has value. And I think that you have to start there. Some people would also say that it's feasible, that we can actually do it. I think Guy's made one other comment, which is it's sustainable. If you don't have those things, if you don't know that it's of value, don't know that it's feasible, you don't know it's sustainable, then it throws in just kind of like a question mark inside yourself with all your energy that you bring to any given task. Once you have those things firmly in place, that you know it's of value, you know the value and that it's of value, then I think you can kind of pour yourself into it and really take ownership and enjoy the work that you do. I've already stated the piece that we need to ensure that we're doing the most important next thing. We also plan because we need to ensure that we're coordinating with others, and that we understand the consequences of unexpected events on the 2 items, doing the next most important thing and coordinating with others. So this one's a little bit meta, but basically says, we can adjust to changes and we can react to changes that help us make sure that we're still doing the most important thing and still communicating with others about those things. I'm tempted to drag up the Agile Manifesto because it kind of gets to the heart of those. I think the Agile Manifesto is in here. This is like a super simplified version. If you haven't seen that, I believe it's on our wiki, and it's also pretty easy to find them. Yeah, please.
Okay. I want to go back to some concrete, because, I mean, I believe in all of these things. But if
And I know that we're at a very high level and you want concrete. We're going to get there. We're not going to get there today.
Okay, so just tell me that, but let me ask a
Yeah.
question. What I'm looking at is coordinate with others. I'm looking for a way for us to do that practically.
Practically, yeah.
How are we going to do that? Because
I will try as we go. As we go, I will try to weave in as many of the tools and the expectations and the things that we have in place already. You yourself wrote iteration planning, release planning, project planning in the wiki. With my involvement. In there is expectation of communication and contact with the customer.
Right.
And so I will get to those things as we go. It's not going to happen today. This is too 10,000 foot level. So.
Right.
All right.
So I know TFS is part of it. I don't think meetings and stuff.
Yeah. So I've already discussed that XP and Agile planning is infused with lean principles. Some of those principles, I may have already talked about them, but I'm going to talk about them anyways. And this is where I want to talk about a little bit where our tools hurt us, right? So TFS hurts us in visibility. So the first one is it helps us see options and helps us create visibility. Those are two super important lean principles, right? And so if you think of what Agile does for us, these are two really important things. Now, when you start to move in a tool and you start to take things out of the physical realm and they become abstract, so a story is nothing more than some row in a database on a tool called TFS, that's hard to put your hands on. And that's why putting out that organizational structure, that hierarchy of organizational structure, and saying, literally, it's posted on the wall, everything that's marked blue is going to be worked on, everything that's checked off is done, where you see the hierarchy and you can see how much work is to be done and how much work is being done on any given week and the changes from week to week. That's making it visible. And some of our tools, I think with the new versions, moving to the work item manager where we put things in those Kanban buckets of work to be done per iteration, work completed but not tested, and the work that's been tested and accepted. That tool is a tool that makes it visible, and that's the power of making it visible. So I will always be looking for ways, within reason, resource, price-wise, to make our things so that we can see more options per program, per task, and make it more visible. So when you see me making diagrams, asking you to create diagrams, whether they're conceptual website diagrams or sequence diagrams, the reason why is because I'm trying to create that visibility that I think is needed. Okay, so estimates always come second to actuals. Again, this is why this is going to lead back into velocity again, burn down charts, things like that, or burn up charts. But you got to follow the actuals. That's why I'm always asking you guys, please put in your time. Please, when you're completing tasks, log your tasks. Okay. So this is why I'm on this all the time. And again, I think all these kind of estimate pieces will come back to play once we start looking at making estimates and at tracking our completions, and then making decisions about how much more we can do based on our velocity. So planning allows us to adjust. Plans must be simple to build, change, and destroy. And that needs to be at the very rudimentary level all the way through the full plan. And so if you create some big, huge, elaborate waterfall plan that everyone has to follow and has to be maintained and updated, and I put thousands of hours into managing and making sure that everything's updated, am I going to be willing to throw that away? There's going to be a hesitancy on my part. I'm going to be like, no, it's my project plan, man. I'm going to keep dumping hours into this thing, even though it's totally obsolete at this point and doesn't reflect reality or what we're working on. I'm going to keep working on this project plan. Well, if you keep nice little tight iterations and tight releases and tight projects where your plan stays meaningful and stays current, and it's as easy as ripping up a story card and throwing it away if that story becomes irrelevant, and there's no drama. We're not saving. Oh, we need to save all the stories that we throw away,
Right.
Go ahead.
It's something silly, but do you know why they call it waterfall? That's like some idea.
One thing comes after the next, comes after the next, comes after the next.
That's not a waterfall.
There's no, and iterations of this. we're going back and forth between doing this.
Well,
and
waterfall is
process.
where you get up to a point, all of a sudden,
Yeah, you
it
don't,
drops.
It
you don't
drops
go
to the
back. You
next
don't.
It drops and you don't
You
go back.
can't go back. It's
I don't
not-
see a waterfall as steps.
There are waterfalls that are steps. Most waterfalls are just one step, right?
I think the idea is that they plan, and then it's either going to make or break. I mean, they put all their eggs in one basket. It's either going to make it off over the waterfall, or it's just going to
Yeah. So the essence of planning, is honesty. Is to have honesty, you have to have trust. Trust with your customer, trust with your peers, and so keeping plans honest and expecting change. That's kind of at the heart of it. So I think waterfall methods are really resistant to change. They try and encourage you to not change. So almost done here. I thought I'm a visual learner, so I thought I would kind of show some visuals that kind of reiterate the things that we've been talking about. So you start out with a backlog with unfinished features. You look at what are the most important features. This is that whole notion of we're doing the next most important thing with your customer. You do planning. You create an iteration through iteration planning. You have to keep your plans honest. So again, this is all the same stuff we've just been talking about. It's just a visual to see it. Then you have an iteration of your daily activities, daily stand-up, that sort of thing. And then ultimately, what you want out of this process is working software. And then you just keep doing it over and over and over again. Okay. So, but not to I mean, it's just one little teeny node here, but working software is the whole point. Okay. I've never gone back and looked through 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what work items there were, what tasks there were. I don't care. Once the project's done, it's gone. Working software is the only thing I care about. So all that other stuff, the more we can get rid of it.
Stuff is useful for learning to predict your estimates.
It is, but I would say you need to internalize that versus have it historically available. If you're not internalizing it, then yes, it's absolutely important. But I think that is our job as professionals, is to internalize those efforts. And
Something that can be used by other people, project managers who may not be aware at the time it's going on and want to go back and say,
yeah,
what was the speed? How did this compare to another project?
Yep. And those are important estimating tools. So that's the next section. Okay. So why plan? Again, this is kind of traditional. You have analysis, and this you can say this is a couple of days, but you could also say it's months, right? This is 3 or 4 or 5 months. Then you do 3 or 4 or 5 months of design. Then you do 3 or 4 or 5 months of coding. Then you do 3 or 4 or 5 months of testing, and then you finally demo it to the user at the end. And all the pressure is all right here, right? And it's crazy. So
Actually, that's not showing the real picture, because Don will do one and following you say fix it.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a simplified version, right? So there's an analogy that people use. They say instead of chopping the cake this way, you want to chop the cake this way. So Agile says do a little layer of design and analysis and coding and testing. Do all of them in a little slice, rather than trying to do the top layer of design. So Agile says do a little bit of every single one each time.
This picture on the right is why I think people get the wrong impression of Agile, because what it needs to say is analyze, design, and code on each week. But in the very beginning, it needs to say analyze. See, that doesn't say that. But you need to go in and you need to find out what.
Yeah, this is focusing. Yeah, this is missing. But how do you show multiple iterative processes?
Yeah,
It is a
that's
simplified
why
diagram.
people get wrong.
Yeah, I agree. So you could put, okay, so this is saying the exact same thing. This is saying the exact same thing. It's saying instead of look at a user story, do a little analysis, a little design, a little code. But what you're saying is there's a feature over the top of
That's
this
also missing.
which is missing, and I totally agree. And it's but yeah,
Analyze
which is
and
release
plan.
planning. Which is release planning. Yeah, exactly. So this is the extreme programming model at the very highest level. And this is what Kathy's talking about, is this, and Joel, what you were talking about later, I said I would get back to, is there's this notion of an architectural spike and then a system metaphor. An architectural spike is an architectural upfront effort to understand the scope of the system that you're trying to build, the features, the large chunks of features. JJ, in our project that we're working on, it would be, the teaching, this research and service. It's the big chunky layers that are going to exist. It's not down to the individual pages or features or components of the page. It's the big chunky features.
I would say that that's true in reports too, right? We have to do that same kind of understanding of the story.
Yeah, I would think any project, whether it's a development project, an implementation project, I would say they all can follow this same paradigm. Release planning, again, this is the thing that Kathy is saying is really missing, is this release planning. She's talked about both of these really. But release planning has to happen over the top of iterations. So iterations happen, then a couple iterations happen, then release planning happens again. Iterations happen, then release planning happens again. So these are all cyclical things that have to take place. Acceptance tests is where the customer is always looking at the tests and saying, yep, this is something that adds value to us. This is something that passes our tests, and we're happy with it. And then once you have that, then you're releasing. Every time this thing iterates, every time this release iterates, you're popping out some usable, workable software.
It sounds like the release planning will have to be redone every 3 or 4 iterations.
Yeah. And if you jump back here and you look at here, the customer doesn't realize any benefit. Okay, customers don't know what they want in large part. And they don't realize any benefit from the software until this stage, and they can't go, oh, that's what you built us. You built exactly what we said, and we don't want it.
Yeah.
And they can adjust. They can look at they can get the value right now, and they can look at it and say, oh, we're headed in the right direction. We like it. Or, whoops, you know what? Actually, what we do is this instead, and they can adjust that. Where if you're releasing a big push, you're not going to get it.
Can I please try to enunciate something that's really good about release planning too?
Go for it.
I think that what happens if you don't do release planning is maybe you know that you have this to do. And if you don't do release planning, then you work on this, and you work on this, and you work on this, and you don't end up with anything that the customer can use, even though it's there. When you do the overall planning, you go, okay, here's what I got. Let me see, what can I give the customer they can use? I can give them this, so I'm going to work on these pieces first. And then I'm going to work on this piece over here.
That is the heart of release planning. Absolutely.
So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know how much that's a part of the process, because sometimes we don't do that big of a project. But like for the AY thing, this is what I'm trying to do right now, is figure out what minimal piece of what they want we can give them that makes sense to them, that they can use, and then layer that on the other pieces.
So when a project starts, there's this called project initiation. It's kind of a weird space because you don't have a lot of these numbers and a lot of these things you don't have all the stories, you don't have everything in your hands, and so it feels really uncomfortable. But once you get the project kicked off, what you're going to get is a project velocity kicking out of your iterations. And you use that project velocity, don't put it here, but this thing should circle back here into the next iteration planning. And project velocity becomes one of the key elements. You're looking at your release plan, you're saying what stories do we want, what's the next most important stuff. You're using that project velocity to say how much do we think we're going to get done. And often the metaphor is today's weather, best predictor of tomorrow's weather is today's weather. So you look at yesterday, what's it going to be like today? You look at today, and say that's what it's going to be like tomorrow. Now, does it change? Yes, it does. Is it exactly accurate? No, but you can flow along with it and say, we got 3 stories done today. We think, or this iteration, we think we'll get 3 stories done next iteration, right? And that's about not overcommitting. It's about not undercommitting. That kind of makes sense? This is just a visual, just to show you kind of the pieces that are done. And then this is your daily. This is at a daily level. And I didn't include that one. We'll get to that one. And then this is the same thing. There's XP and Scrum. They're kind of all the same, and it has the same stuff. This is kind of all your planning and your release planning, and then your sprint planning, and then a sprint is basically the same thing as an iteration. Once you get into it, there's a cycle for a daily cycle, just like this one is a big cycle, and then there's a daily cycle. There's the same daily cycle, and you're releasing product increments over time. The team includes everybody, including the product owner, the customer. There's a review of the sprint. There's a retrospective. There's a planning. Oops. It's the same cycle. So when you hear Scrum, when you hear XP, when you hear Agile, they're just variations, and everyone needs to fit it to themselves.
What's the difference between stakeholders and product owners?
A stakeholder would be anybody who is impacted by the outcome of the product.
So are the stakeholders more like management?
A stakeholder, even a customer, from our customer's perspective, even a customer could be a stakeholder. Anybody who's impacted by the change in the product would be a stakeholder.
So someone who might not use it, but they're indirectly impacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And each project has to decide, how far they want to go.
In regards to Scrum roles, how does that? I don't understand what the difference is between a stakeholder and a product owner. Wouldn't a product owner be a customer?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
In the HRIR project, the applicants are stakeholders, but so are the
Program office.
HRIR program directors. If they're impacted by the product.
Got it.
The product owners are obviously the HR execs.
Okay.
And the users are Celeste.
So stakeholder is really who it affects.
Mm-hmm.
And the product owner is.
Well, how's that different from users?
So a student never uses student tracking system themselves.
Right.
Only program office people do it. The manager never uses it, but they're a stakeholder. But a user would be someone who physically uses the software, from day to day.
Okay.
And the stakeholder benefits from what they exist.
And in some cases, you could say product owner is it can be like a group of people. They show it as an individual, but it can be a group of people. It doesn't have to be just one. The program's own the student tracking software. One program. Check. That's all I have for today.
Can I have that? I like those last two. Those last 3